We start off by looking at some of our key learning objectives for today's lesson. And our first one is understanding the profession of interior design, followed by understanding the various design fee methods, how us as designers use our fee methods. We then look at the ability to define a design contract. What is your design contract? We then look at understanding the key elements that make up your design contracts. And lastly, we develop the skill in creating our very own design contracts, the perfect foundation to starting your very first project or even the first steps to starting your very own business. But before we get started, let's look at a little quote. This is a quote that I've come across recently that I've really resonated with. We influence life patterns by creating healthy and safe environments. And this is by Patricia McLachlan. It really puts a whole new spin on the way we see interior design and even the way we design our interiors. And let's get started as we introduce ourselves to the profession of interior design. An interior designer's role is to provide the best and safest advice for those who work, live, and relax within our interior spaces. As you know, we as designers operate across a variety of different design sectors. Can any of you remember what these sectors are? Pop your answers into your Morpheus text box. So, for those of you who are unsure, we start off with our retail design sector. We work in hospitality design, residential design, and commercial design sectors. Obviously, there's a lot more sectors to this. They can be broken down a lot further, but these are the main ones and typically ones that I've been working with and the ones that I'm going to take you through. But no matter what sector or area of design you are creating or designing spaces for, your interiors need to be professionally designed and need to comply with all the building, health, and safety requirements and regulations. It is our responsibility as the interior designer to provide the best possible advice to our clients. But if you provide inaccurate advice or guidance, you will incur extra cost, delay, and a lot of risk to the client. But not only the client, this will impact you as the designer as well as the suppliers around you on your projects. This will cause industry complaints and bad reputations. And if you remember from our marketing strategies lesson, word of mouth is key to what we do. So make sure that you're always striving for the best. A designer must therefore possess knowledge of a multitude of skills, but one of our most important skills is a strong grasp of mathematics and numbers. This would be used for measuring, calculating, dimensioning, budgeting, financial finesse, and financial understanding. As a professional designer, some of our tasks include defining the space and the safety requirements of the interior, as well as producing plans, drawing up a schedule of costs, quoting our design fees to the clients, and setting up vital contractual documentation for our clients to sign off, a very important aspect and element to what we do. A really big concern for most designers and most people entering the interior design industry is how do you charge for your services? I'm sure most of you have asked yourself this question or grappled with this idea. Have no fear, we are going to cover some of the most used fee structure methods in the interior design industry to date. There are some standard methods of quoting for your design fees and your design time to your client that have been tried and tested. But please remember that there is no one size fits all and different methods may be used for different project installations or scopes or project types. So let's take a look at what they are. We start off with a fixed rates method. We then have an hourly rates method, a percentage fee structure method, cost per square meter or cost per square foot, and then a retail price percentage. But when it comes to your fee structures, you obviously would be presenting these during your initial interview with your client. As an interior designer, we need to explain the options available to the potential clients. So the way you structure your payment options is obviously totally up to you, but you could use a combination of two. So for example, I work with either options 1, a fixed rate structure, or options number 4, cost per square meter. I explain this to the client up front and then obviously let them decide if they would like to go with either A or B or C or D or whatever choice you've chosen for that specific project type. Let's start off with our fixed rate fee or fixed rate quoting fee. This simply means a fixed amount or design fee that has been allocated to the deliverables by the designer. For this rate to be worked out, you need to know exactly what is expected from the client, as well as the scope of works for the project. I typically would think about how long the scope is going to take me to complete, work out a rough estimate of the hours that I charge times the fee, and that would then get me to my fixed rate. So for example, if I was creating a simple sample board for a client, it may take me roughly about 5 hours. I typically would need, let's say, $55 or 500 Rand per hour. So I'd say 5 hours times my $55 per hour rate is equivalent to $275. And this amount I would then propose to the client as my fixed fee for my sample board. These are just random numbers that I'm using. You definitely need to investigate a little bit about what the going rate in your areas are. So what fee is charged in your area at the moment, and then obviously use that to develop your fixed rate. Then we need to look at how much is paid up front. So this is like a deposit type scenario, the percentage or the rate that you're going to take as a deposit. It can vary from about 10 to 40%, but I definitely suggest ensuring that you go no lower than 30 to 40% just to cover yourself, especially when you're starting out. You can absolutely use your initiative here, but keep it higher than lower. Then what are the drawbacks for this fixed rate method or design fee structure method? The only drawback for this method of payment or for service is that the scope of works may end up being broader than expected, and the designer may end up spending more time and energy to complete the job with some small losses. But this is about it. Otherwise, it's a really nice method to use, a method of payment to use. Next, we have the hourly rate. This is a popular method or mode of payment, the hourly rate method, which has been used for many years by many different professionals. The way it works is that the interior designer is supposed to keep a detailed record of the daily work and the number of hours that they've spent to execute these works or design projects. The client then is required to pay the bill of these fees at the end of the month. So the monthly hours that are spent times by the hourly rate, and that is then invoiced directly to the client. Let's look at the drawbacks. So the client generally does not like this method of payment, as it could cause scenarios or cases where the designer may work slower than other designers. It could end up in a scenario where you as a designer are working faster and therefore getting paid less per hour. So as you can see, it's a little bit complicated and causes areas maybe of overlap. And it could even cause instances where the client feels cheated. So if you are working slower to get a higher hourly rate, your fee or your hourly rate fee would be a lot higher than, say, for instance, a skilled designer who's working incredibly fast. So quite a complicated fee or fee structure, definitely something that needs time and energy spent on, and then obviously something that I would use with regular clients or clients that I'm very familiar with. Our next method of fee structure is our percentage fee. This method is adding a percentage to the final fee of work completed on the total project. So if it's a percentage added to the total project fee. Charges are the net or the wholesale prices that the interior designer pays to the merchants. And then the predetermined percentage markup is then applied to your final net cost. So the markup, for example, on furniture or labor is what you pay for the labor plus a percentage markup, and then that is billed directly to the client. Let's look at the percentage. So what percentage markup do you allocate? The percentage charge is dependent on the nature and the scope of the project. How long is the project going to take you? What is entailed in this project? Generally, you'd work on some sort of a sliding scale. So your project build costs, if they are over a certain figure, then it's a percentage of that figure. So let's say anything over $100,000, you'd work on a 10% figure. Anything less than $100,000, you might work on a 15% figure. It's all up to you, and also something that needs a little bit of time and energy spent on working out these percentages. Let's look at the drawbacks. Some clients may have issues with this mode of payment, as they feel the designer would intentionally choose pricier items to bump up their percentage or commission. But because this makes the project end up being so much of a higher standard and more stylish, the final result always looks amazing. However, word of warning, Do not bump up your prices so that you get a higher percentage. The client will find out and they won't respect or trust you going forward. So this could cause you to lose a client. All in all, however, this is a really nice method of fee structure and one that I use quite regularly. The next fee structure is our price per square meter or price per square foot. Usually used on smaller projects or very, very large projects. A fee is charged per square meter or per square foot. So the designer would go and measure out the space of your client, and then that square meter rate would be times by a predetermined value. So for example, I went to my client and I measured out 10 square meters of the space, and let's say my per square meter rate is $55 or 500 Rand. I would times that by the square meters. So $55 times 10 square meters equals $550, and that is then my rate for that project. So my per square meter rate is the $55, and that I can tell the client up front. What are the drawbacks? Space allocations at the beginning of the project may change towards the end of the project, and that then could cause some inconsistencies and lead to inquiring alternative billing options. So you might start off with 10 square meters of space now, and then later the client may say, oh, can't you quickly come and look at my lounge area? And then that gets added, and maybe the square meterage wasn't included in that cost upfront. So when you're using this billing method, be a little bit flexible, explain to the client how it works, and be very solid on the fact that every square meter will be charged for. This billing method is really popular for commercial interior projects and hospitality interior projects. Next, we've got our retail percentage or percentage method. Instead of charging a fee for a design service, the stated retail price from the retailer is charged to the client, and the interior designer's payment comes from the discount given. So remember when we were discussing the showrooms and I mentioned that generally as designers we get a designer discount? Well, that is where this will apply. So just to summarize, if you went and bought a table for a client, say the table cost you 100 Rand or $100, your kickback or your designer discount was $20, you would still charge the client the $100 and your fee for this service would be the $20. So you would be working on percentage and commission. Let's look at the drawbacks. When other services are needed during your project, the problem might arise at this point. So for example, if you needed the service of a plumber or an architect, they're required to complete a certain job. Let's say fix the toilet seat or come and reinstall a basin. The interior designer will have to source and find the plumber. They would need to hire them, supervise them, and make sure the work is carried out in accordance with the drawings or the plans. So since you won't have any discount on the plumber's fee, you would then need to find some alternative billing method to make sure that you are earning some sort of percentage on the plumber's fee. So you might earn a percentage on the basin, you would get a retail or design kickback on the basin, but you wouldn't get it on the labor. So in essence, you would lose out a little amount on the labor. That would then be up to you. Use your initiative if that's something that you would be happy to do. Or you could discuss it with the client up front. Any labor costs would then be charged at a different rate or different fee structure. Then with all of the above methods, you can use them in combination to suit your project or your client. The initial drawings may be charged at an hourly rate, and then you may want to use a price per square meter method to charge for project coordination or selecting finishes, etc. It's all up to you. Whatever rate or fee you decide works for you, it must be spelt out in a letter of agreement that needs to be drawn up by a certified interior designer or lawyer. Let's look at the design contract or your letter of agreement. Whether you are starting your own interior design business, renovating a friend or client's home, or working for an interior design firm, there is one thing that remains vital to starting any project. Can any of you tell me what that is? What is vital to starting off your design project? Pop your answers into your Morpheus text box. For those of you who are unsure, it is your design contract or your letter of agreement, something that needs to hold your client to the work that you're going to be performing or the work that you're going to be giving over to the client. Let's take a closer look as to what the letter of agreement or your project design contract actually is. It's a legal document or tool that helps resolve any disputes or problems that arise on your projects or in your relationships or interactions with your client. It protects not only you, but the client as well. So in simple terms, it should present how your company functions and works, and it'll outline your expectations during the project job or the project process. The two parties that need to sign the letter of agreement or your design contract are the interior designer, the person or firm providing the work or providing the service, and the client or business organization, which is the party that wants to employ the services of said interior designer or said interior design firm. But let's take a step back. Remember, on our project timelines, when do you think one would present the design contract to the client? Let's take a quick look at our project timeline. So we had our obtaining the brief, then we looked at schematic design, third we had concept development, fourth we did construction documentation, 5 we have construction maintenance, and 6 we had construction administration. So ideally, you want your project contracts signed off in phase 1 before we have even completed phase 1. The rest follows. So you would have your project contract signed off. This would signify the fact that the client wants to proceed with your services, and then the rest will follow. You really want to avoid doing too much extra work without the client being on board and without payment having happened. So during phase 1, you would ideally first meet with your client, and this is where you would find out what you would be quoting for. You would then draw up your brief, and then the last 2 steps you could actually complete together, signing off your contract and signing off the brief. I would typically send them together in an email so I can keep a paper trail of everything, and this will also ensure that the client knows exactly what we're proposing and gives a holistic idea of what the project entails. Why do we need an agreement no matter what? Your client may seem like a really nice person or someone that you've worked with before, but things change. People have different views. Rather be safe than sorry and set up your contract. Let's take a look at the importance of our contracts. Signing a formal interior design contract or letter of agreement is important for your business. It'll help protect you against any misunderstandings or disagreements along the way during your projects. You and your client can enter a project with the best of intentions, but things can still go wrong. People can change their minds, or misunderstandings can occur. Good clients will have no issues about signing these agreements before you start your work. Your design contracts need to spell out everything. It needs to include every detail of the services that are going to be conducted by the designer. What is going to be produced? How is the payment going to be handled? How long does the client have to make payment? Are there any subcontractors or other team members involved in this project? And how are the disputes going to be handled? Spell out everything. You then want to send this to your client before any physical work has started. They should then sign it and send it back to you as an indication of approval. And then only then can any of the exciting design process start. There are 2 terms relating to the contract that I've been mentioning in this lesson. Firstly, we had the letter of agreement and the design contract. While both a letter of agreement and a contract are binding legal documents, a contract usually has more detail. Both documents require signature and agreement from both parties, both the client and the designer, indicating that they are happy to proceed with the project and what has been laid out as a scope. Some tips to remember when creating these documents. Firstly, keep it simple, define the deliverables, and communicate. So when we talk about keeping it simple, no matter if you're going with your formal contract or your letter of agreement, keep the language easy for both parties to understand. When we speak about defining the scope and the deliverables, define everything in detail. What are you proposing to do for the client? What are the physical deliverables that you're giving to the clients in terms of drawing, mood boards, sample boards? Anything and everything that you can list needs to be spelled out in this document. When we speak about communication, how is the communication during the lifespan of the project going to take place? When is it going to take place? Indicate comments on working hours, what your work commitments are, what your hourly commitments are, etc. Spell everything out. Next, we're going to look at designing and developing the contract. We're going to look at creating our very own contract or agreement letters as a template. Starting to create your interior design contract template from scratch isn't an easy task. You need to develop this contract to suit your project needs and to include all the vital components relating to your project and to your client. Once your contract template is in place, it might be a good idea to have a lawyer just have a little quick read over it to make sure that you've covered all your bases. Next, we need to look at some of the headings and elements that you need to include in your contracts or letters of agreement. Firstly, you need to include the detail of the agreement. What is the agreement about? we need to have a company introduction. You will outline your project. You'll include your design fee, so all of the design fee structures that we've just looked at. You'll include payment terms, purchasing and warranty terms, contractors and subcontracting terms, copyright, photography, termination, and lastly, an insurance clause. So having had a look at this, let's take a look at these headings in a little bit more detail. We start off with the detail of the agreement. First on our list is the detail of the agreement. What are we signing? What document is this? In simple terms, we are highlighting what this document is about, and we are indicating that it's an agreement between two parties engaging in design services that are listed within the agreement. This is a contract that I have created for my own clients, and at the top you can see that I introduce what we are signing. So I've clearly stated this is a letter of agreement and a commencement letter, and it indicates who is agreeing to start this agreement. I've got a place for the designer to sign and put all their details, as well as the client. And then I've indicated exactly why we're signing this, what the parties are signing about. Next, we look at the company introduction. This is where you're going to introduce your company. Who is the company? What do you do? What is the philosophy? This needs to be really short and sweet, and it needs to encourage and excite the client as to what they can expect from your amazing services. So let's jump back into my example. So as you can see in my contract, I've got all the introduction of the agreement, and then at the bottom of this first page I've indicated a little blurb about what the company does. So I've written that we're a passionate team who pride ourselves on quality and customer service. We are believers in value and holistic project views. We believe working closely with our clients throughout the design process is the foundation to a successful project. And here you can see I've put a little indication here. This is my company name, but you would obviously allocate your company name here. So as you can see, a really short and sweet little blurb. It excites the client, it shows them that we're proud of what we're doing, and it's right in the agreement so they can relate back to that whenever they want. Next, we have our project outline. So this is merely a description of the project. It's not the scope. The scope is quite different in the fact that it's detailed and something that we wouldn't have actually tackled at this point. Remember, we are only just having finished our first client meeting, so we've only got a little idea of what is expected for the project. As we go along, we will start creating a little bit more detail, and that will then become our scope. But for now, a project outline is simply what you are committing to do for the client. So this might be drawings of the space, it might be creating a concept for the client, it might be just saying that you're changing flooring, it may just be project managing, etc. But it's not going into detail about how long this is going to happen, it's not going into detail about what finishes you're choosing, etc. A simple outline. So let's take a look at what I've done on my project contract as an outline for my project. In my case, I do a little project outline at the beginning. So as you can see, I've indicated we're doing concept development, project management, construction of Sophia's office. And then under my fixed fee headings, so phase 1 of $1,000, I've indicated what I'm proposing to do for that. Phase 2, $55 per hour, and I'm indicating what I'm proposing to do for that fee too. So it's kind of like 2 project outline fees. Next, we need to add a design fee outline. So what are we proposing to charge the client? What is the fee and how does that look? It's an estimation of what we are proposing to charge the client for these services. First, you need to decide how you're going to charge the client. So remember, we looked at our fee structures. Are you going to do an hourly rate? Are you going to charge a percentage rate? Or are you going to have a fixed fee rate? Or are you going to charge a retail percentage rate? How are you going to charge the client? Once you've decided that, you're then going to add that to your contractual document. So back on my contract, as you can see on the second page, I've set out my fee structure. So you can see I've got a general fee structure, and that's a percentage base. These are percentages that I've worked with. You don't necessarily have to work with them, but they have worked nicely for me. So as you can see, I've got a 25% project fee if the value is X and below. And then I've got a 20% project fee if the value is between X, and etc. Or you can see I've added another fee proposal method. So as you can see, I've got a fixed fee rate or fixed fee proposal here, and this is for a concept proposal. The $1,000 amount here is just something that I've thumbsucked that needs to be thought out, and you need to understand the fee proposals in your area. So that's a fixed fee, or you can see that I've also got an hourly fee proposal. So I've indicated $55 per hour, and that is for sourcing, finishes, scheduling, and detailing. So depending on what client I have, what project I'm working with, I would choose which fee proposal we're going to use. So for example, let's look at Sophia's office space. I think that our percentage fee structure is going to work best. I would literally just highlight all of that, take that out, and then would use my general fee proposal for my clients. And then I'd put these values in accordingly. Next, we need to indicate our payment terms. So in this case, you're going to list the time frame that you expect payment to happen, the number of days the client has to pay you in full after they've received the receipt of your invoice. You need to include how the payment needs to happen, so what percentages are going to be paid when, and at what point in the project does the client need to make payment. You also need to include a clause that states that you are going to stop work if invoices or payments are not made. So should the client not make payment on time, work will stop. That does need to be included. So let's take a look at my contract and see how I've done this. We're going to scroll down to my payment terms, so that follows my project fee outline. And as you can see, I've got a heading stating the payment terms. This is where you can find the payment terms, and I've indicated how the client needs to pay. So I've started off with, upon acceptance of quotation, I need a 50% deposit of the contract price. Prior to documentation being issued, I'll need a 20% payment. On completion of the documents being issued, I take a 30% payment of contract price. And then I've added this in here, which I think is a really good heading or outline. On presentation of invoice, so any outstanding amount will be paid at this point. So these figures in bold can be adjusted. So if we looked at before, we said we wanted a 40% deposit amount. I would then leave that as 20 and 30, and then I'd probably add a 10% here. And that would be very good for the client. You always want to leave a little 10% out, because the client then can hold on to any money for snagging purposes. So if, for instance, the project's not finished and snagging needs to be done, the client feels a little bit more in control if they've got something to hold back, even if it's a small amount, and they can pay you that on approval of the construction and build being absolutely totally complete and up to the final standard of the client. So that is essentially what payment terms mean. You would also indicate a little section here for banking details, so you'd put all your banking details in. And then this is quite important, an indication of when payment needs to be made, and if payment is late, if you're adding on any interest. So if payment hasn't been made within 7 days for my contract, I've added on a little 5% interest, which will be added on each day. I don't actually do this, just a little tip, but it's really nice to get a little fire into the client, and it encourages them to pay on time. Next heading on our project contract is our purchasing and warranty clause, or our purchasing and warranty heading. This is a very standard clause, but an important section to add. It's important to ask yourself and the client a few questions. So who is going to be making the purchases? Are you going to make the purchases, or is the client going to be making the purchases? That needs to be listed. Are you going to add a percentage on top of the product? So that goes back to how we're structuring our fee. Are we extending our designer discount to the client? So that is definitely an option. Are you giving the client your designer kickback fee? Are there any warranties? And if so, who will be managing these warranties? And can the warranties be handled by the client at a later stage? Who is responsible for these claims? That all needs to be listed. So we're going to jump back onto my contract and see how I've listed these elements. Under my payment terms, I have my purchasing and warranty heading. This is quite an important heading. Under this heading, I've listed all the details relating to purchasing and warranty. So for example, items will be purchased on behalf of the client. So that means that I as the designer will be buying the items for the client, and the warranties for the purchases will be handed over to the client at the end. Quite important here that you add in the client's name as well as your company name. The more detail, the better. It also says here that all warranty claims will be the responsibility of the client. So once you finish the project, something goes wrong, it is then the client's responsibility to tackle that issue and resolve. So this really is a nice little indication or element to add into your contract. It really takes any liability off you, and it explains exactly what is going to happen to the client, so there is no misunderstanding at the end of the project. So definitely something to add in. Obviously you can word it the way you want to, but I've worded it like this and it seems to have worked really nicely on my projects. Next on the list of headings to add to our contracts is our subcontractors clause. So as a designer, we don't know how to do everything, right? There are going to be some things that we don't know how to do, and we shouldn't be expected to be experts for everything. And that is why we have this clause. We use this clause when we are wanting to employ another contractor or subcontractor. You may want to work with them, but you are not responsible for their work. Don't forget, they're entering into an independent contract with your client. So this section should explain that, and it should explain that you are not liable. Next, copyright. A really big and often overlooked element with interior design contracts, the intellectual property, your IP. There's a surprising amount of intellectual property involved in this process, including your design drawings, your concept development, details, rendering, etc. These assets are created for clients but are ultimately owned by the designer, which is you, and they're valuable. So protect yourself. Make sure that you've got some sort of copyright clause in your contracts. Next is photography. In essence, this clause allows you to take photographs and display your work. We need to add this section in for photography. As design professionals, we work so hard to build up our work, our portfolios. You work so very hard to create your masterpieces and final projects. Sometimes you might get a scenario where your client does not allow you to take photographs for your portfolio or for your website. We need to explain this to the client, and we need to explain how we're going to use these photographs and how we will protect the client's privacy if that is a requirement. Next, the termination of the contract. It's important to include termination clauses to let the client know how they're able to get out of the contract, and vice versa, how we are able to get out if the client is not behaving or performing the way that they should. This clause protects both us and the client, so be sure to be clear and transparent at any possible point in your contracts. This will avoid disputes and bad reputations later down the line. Next, we have our insurance clause. This obviously varies depending on country to country, but will always be a good idea to ensure that either you as a designer or your client has some sort of insurance to protect against the unknown. I have asked my broker, and I advise you to do the same, ask them to advise on how to go about getting some form of insurance for your design project experience. And there you have it. We have created our very first interior design contracts with all of our vital headings and all of the vital information listed. This is obviously just a basic template with basic points, but you can use it to suit your clients or your projects, just amend it accordingly. And that brings us to the end of our lesson. Let's do a quick recap before we finish. So in today's lesson, we looked at the profession of interior design, where we understood the responsibilities and some of the elements that we perform as designers. We then looked at contracts and the importance of contracts and why drawing them up will not only be beneficial for you, but for the client as well. We then looked at the design fee structure, how to set up a fee structure to suit you and your project. And lastly, and most importantly, we looked at how to create your very own design contracts or design agreement letters. So with all the headings and all the information, you can use this to build your very own contract. And that being said, that brings us to our challenge. For today's challenge, we are going to task you with creating your very own contract for Sophia's office space environment. So remember Sophia's office space, we looked at it right throughout module 2. You're going to take all of that information and use it to build up your contract. You can use the headings that I've provided in this lesson, or you can create your own contracts and letters of agreement simply by looking at templates online or just amending the information that I've provided.